Welcome to one of the best episodes I've ever recorded on culture, finding your purpose, finding your voice in the workplace. Today's guest, Aoife O'Brien, will sweep you away by every advice that she's going to give you, starting with number one, understanding yourself at the workplace. Who are you when you're really thriving? Who are you when your boundaries aren't clearly defined and you're actually falling for the so-called competition of a company that really is taking advantage of you? Number two is surrounding yourself with like-minded people. It will get you to the best of rooms, to the best of places. And you know how I always say that your network is more important than your net worth. So getting in a room with like-minded people will push you and your values and challenge your essence to just pour the magic right out of you to whatever your passion is. And number three, advocate for yourself. You're going to see that this is Aoife's favorite towards the end. Hey, it's Sonia, and welcome to the SMARTA Podcast. But before I say anything else, please could I ask you a favor? If you didn't yet subscribe to this show or follow the podcast, please could you do so now, as it keeps helping me grow it. And in return, I promise you that I'll keep having a better lineup of guests that just keeps growing, and an episode for you always Monday, so you can get better and grow smarter with me on whatever topic I'm coming out next with. Aoife O'Brien is the founder of Happier at Work, host of the Happier at Work podcast. And let me tell you, we're recording this on the International Day of Happiness. So what better podcast could you listen to if you want to put a smile on your face and settle your heart and your mind that you know that you're on the right trajectory, that your career is not slow enough, it's going at the right pace. Now, she's a passionate advocate for creating workplaces that truly work for people. She's got over 2 decades of experience in corporate roles across FMCG, tech, and data. Aoife built a successful global career. However, like many professionals, she found herself feeling unfulfilled or disconnected at work. So instead of accepting it and just bearing with it, she turned that experience into purpose. So today, through her work, Aoife helps leaders better understand what people really need to say to grow and to perform at their best, focusing on an aligned culture, meaningful career development, and clear communication. She's also the author of Thriving Talent, a practical and powerful guide for leaders who want to build those high-performing, human-centered workspaces while balancing the pressures of business performance. At the heart of her work is this Thriving Talent framework, which we're going to go and dive deep into today. And if you want to find out what each of the 5 steps and 3 pillars mean, you're going to have to stay until the very end of the episode. So, are you ready to get smarter with me? Aoife O'Brien, are you ready to get smarter?
I am. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thanks so much for having me, Sonia.
Me too. I'm so excited. I just want to introduce you to the person listening right now, and imagine you can talk directly with them. What would you say would be the top 3 key takeaways from today's discussion if they were to sit with us until the very end?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, understanding yourself is really important. I think sometimes we assume that we understand ourselves more than what we actually do. So to understand yourself, I think it's important to listen to feedback as well. So that would be number 1. I think surround yourself with people who are your tribe. Don't try and fit in to what you think that you should be. And maybe the third one is it's okay to advocate for yourself, whether that is to leave situations that you find a little bit difficult or tricky or that are not good for your mental health. And also when you're in positive situations, don't be afraid to speak up and to share, what's going really well for you.
Love those. Can we just talk a little more about your first point, understanding yourself? Because I'm in a moment of transition where I've just told you before we started recording, I'm finishing off my exams, I'm finishing off high school, moving to university in another country. You get all these new things that you've got to adapt to. I want to ask you, how do you see teenagers that are getting their first job to transition more smoothly? Any tips you might have for them, or any ways that you learned yourself that you wish you knew at the very beginning of your journey?
Great question. And I'm thinking, you've kind of put me in the position where I did that when I was that age as well. For university, I stayed at home, but for every summer during university, I worked abroad.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So the first year I worked in Germany for the summer. The second year I worked in the US. The third year I spent my Erasmus year, the entire year in Barcelona. And then for the final year, I went back to the US again. So,
Wow.
yeah. And I'm trying to think. I think just go. just go with it and see, what does life have to offer. I think when you put yourself out there, you get presented with these various different opportunities. If I cast my mind back to Germany, and we were literally, this was, I won't say it was before the internet, but certainly the internet wasn't what it is now. So this would have been 1998, summer of 1998. So quite a bit of time ago. And we were literally walking in the streets trying to find work. So calling in, dropping our CV, our resume into various different businesses. And that's kind of how we found work. We were faced with a lot of rejection. There was lots of obstacles that came in the way. But I think persistence, keep going and be open to possibilities and be open to opportunities. I think it's very easy to stay kind of with other people who are like us, or to stay in our rooms and not even want to go out and meet other people. But I think it's important to get out there.
Especially for introverts.
And I'm an introvert. And I think, I didn't say this as one of my points, but don't use a label to make an excuse for yourself. I was giving a keynote speech a few years ago, and someone said to me, they raised a hand to ask a question at the end, and they said, well, it's okay for you, but I'm an introvert. I can't do what you do. And I said, well, I'm an introvert and I'm doing this. So don't ever use a label to say, I'm this, so therefore I can't do that.
And I agree 100%. And if I think that this is something I really want to stick to more before I move you to another topic, because I surround myself with other colleagues that feel a lot of imposter syndrome, especially when they're faced with picking out of the thousands of hundreds of universities to go. And especially later on, I also have friends that are in university. They're about to finish and get into their real job and face a lot of, fear and intimidation towards what are they bringing, what are their values that can be valuable to another company. And I had this discussion yesterday with Alan O'Neill, and he was saying that whether you get hired, that in itself is a sign that you are valuable and you bring some sort of input that is worthy in a company.
Yep. Absolutely. I'm sorry to say, but if you're experiencing imposter syndrome now, it's not something that's just going to go away. It's something, I think this perception, we have this perception, I think, no matter what age you are, you look to people who are more advanced, more senior, whatever it might be, and you think, oh, they have it all figured out. They definitely don't experience imposter syndrome. But that's not the case at all. No matter what level you get to, there are still those feelings of, am I worthy for this? Do I actually deserve it? Did I just get lucky? Like, there's all of this messaging that we have. You can learn to manage it. That's not a problem. And for me, the biggest thing is to take action anyway. So I feel really uncomfortable. I feel like a total fraud, but that I won't let that get in the way of me doing what it is I want to do. And coming back to this idea of those transition periods, like going to university or leaving university to start in your first job, those are key periods when we're going to feel that experience. And I think also don't be afraid to ask, okay, so I was hired for this role. I'd love to understand a little bit more about why you selected me. You don't have to say, I feel imposter syndrome, but you can get a sense of like, what is it they're looking for? What does success look like in the role? And what is the person who hired them hoping that they're going to bring to it? What did they see in the person they hired that maybe the person they hired doesn't see in themselves?
Yeah. And it's so important. And I want to link this to how when you were starting out your career, you felt a lot of not belonging. And I want to ask you, what was, you just said putting yourself out there and just doing it anyway. But what would you say is action the person listening right now can take next week, even in another area environment like school, to stop feeling like they're not worthy and actually own their presence, own their values, and speak up?
Yeah, I like the kind of feeling of worthiness is probably not something that they can immediately address. That's probably something they need to dive a little bit deeper into. But what I will say is maybe identify those areas. Like for me, it's this action, isn't it? So identify the areas where you're holding yourself back in some way, that you're not speaking up, that you're not putting yourself forward for a specific opportunity. I want to kind of relate this to something that I read a number of years ago. It was someone posted something about a university in Ireland saying, I can't believe I graduated from here because I would never have thought that I could graduate from here. I would never have thought that I could attend this university. And I was reading this kind of being a bit impolite, let's say, going, how could she think that about that university? It's not a fantastic university. It's not amazing. And when I really thought about it, I thought, well, I probably said the same to myself, but at different universities. So somewhere like Harvard or Cambridge or Oxford, like I didn't apply to there because I assumed that I would never have got in. So I didn't even try. So it's thinking about those things, but from your own perspective. So not comparing to other people, but thinking about yourself. What do you really want to do? Where are you holding yourself back? Where are you not doing the things that you wish you could do because you're afraid of what other people think? You are afraid that you might fail. That you will fail in front of other people, which I think is the big thing. You know, I said I was going to do this, and now look, it's all come crumbling down around me, and I haven't achieved what I said I was going to achieve.
And for a lot of people, it can be really crippling just doing something out of the ordinary that might have, not succeeded in the way you initially planned. Like I
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
now coming home from school, I tripped in front of the whole line of bus waiting for me. I fully face planted the ground. And I got up and I laughed it off. And then everyone around seemed to see that I was fine and started laughing out of my own reaction that I took it so well instead of being ashamed,
Yeah.
burying my face
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess that can translate into the world of, business and realize maybe, you forgot about a very important deadline. How do you turn up to work the next day? Or maybe you had a fraud in terms of money and you were in charge of the marketing budget being transferred across for a good investment, and that investment actually ended up being inexistent. What do you do
Mm,
then?
yeah.
And how do you take it accountably, and how do you take responsibility for that
Yeah.
and show up
This
and
is
advocate?
it. And so there's a couple of things that I'd love to address there. Coming back to your previous question, what's the first thing that people can do? I think maybe just think about what's that very small step. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, but identifying where you're holding yourself back in some way and take a small step towards addressing it. So is it researching universities? Is it looking at, well, what are the criteria? Is it researching a company that you think I would never get accepted there? I would never be able to, but I really want to. Is it just understanding or reaching out to someone who works there or speaking to someone who works there? Like all of these different things. And then I think if you do get caught up in something where you have made a mistake, it's like we're only human and humans make mistakes. And I'm a big proponent of if you make a mistake, it's not about looking back and trying to blame, and it's not looking at people either. It's looking at systems. So usually it's a systems failure in some way. You know, Amy Edmonton I had on my podcast, she talks about 3 different types of failures. So there's failure that was just an easy mistake and it should have been avoided. Like that was kind of a personal misstep or a miscommunication or something, and that kind of often comes down to an individual. But then there's other systemic failures that are ones that are kind of a bit smaller, and then ones that are just a combination of a whole load of things went wrong all at the same time, which are really, they're unavoidable. But it's through making those kinds of mistakes, that's how we learn. And I think when you're early in your career, it's really important to know that most often when we are really successful in our careers early, we don't necessarily take the lessons from that. So the ones who are more successful later in their careers, I think, are the ones who have made a whole load of mistakes. They've learned along the way, they've course corrected. And the other thing to bear in mind is when you look at people and you think, wow, they're so successful, and use this term loosely because people have lots of different ways that they define success as well. It doesn't have to be the car, the house, the job title, etc. But thinking about how they got there is probably through making way more mistakes. I think some people are so afraid of making mistakes that we don't try stuff. But the more you try, the more you fail, and the more likelihood it is that you're going to succeed.
Can I challenge you on that one?
Yes,
So I think
please
a
do.
lot of early people, especially the new generation, have those fear. I mean, I completely agree with you, by the way, but maybe they're having that because of not doing what they said they will do. And this is something so a mutual rule in the world of business. Whether it's just an email or whether it's a full presentation or a pitch that you have to do what you say you will do is the most important thing, and taking action as well, as you said, that I can emphasize and stand upon. Because maybe you have a really charged week like me. I had an exam and I could have just turned up late at this call and apologized, but you already formed that first impression of, well, why is she late when she took time out of her own schedule? I took time out of mine and it's
Yeah,
not efficient. So if I say, oh, I want to record this podcast with you, Eva, I'm gonna do it. And
yeah.
maybe with one excuse a week later it turns into 3, and then that slowly builds into your own imposter syndrome and your own fear.
Mm.
Maybe you have to work backwards to where it actually started from to
Yeah.
discover where you took it
Yeah,
from.
people have different words for that. Some people call that integrity. I
Yeah.
call that commitment. Like, it's if I say I will do something, then I will do it. If there's a deadline attached, then I will meet that deadline. If the deadline needs to be really clear to me, by the way, if I'm to do something. If it's kind of open-ended, then I will get to it. But if there's no deadline, then I'm going to get to it sometime. But if I say I will do something, I absolutely will do it. If you think about it, and this is for you and this is for listeners, think about the people who've let you down, who've said, I'm going to show up for that podcast, and then they don't, or they're late. Or think about someone who's made you a promise, but they didn't deliver on that promise. How do you feel about that person? And do you trust them? And therefore, where are you not doing what you said you would do? And maybe the trick here is twofold. So, first of all, don't commit to doing something if you're not going to do it. And then the second one is follow through. If you say you're going to do something, then absolutely do that. Because if I think even now, so I'm in my, I don't like to say this, but late 40s. So I'm holding on to the mid 40s as long as I can. But if I think about, like, even at this age and this stage in my career, there's still so many people who say one thing, but they don't follow through on it. And it is frustrating. And it does make you think differently about that person.
And 100% I agree with you again. And I think now is the perfect time. I mean, we can center this towards the work and business world more, because you have your work focused so much around human-centered workplaces. What does that mean in practice? Why is it so important also when we talk in terms of culture, to look for a company or an enterprise that does have a very rich culture that
Hmm.
they emphasize a lot?
Yeah, I think so. For me, on the culture piece, I'll come back to that. But
Okay.
the important thing here is that it's a good match for an individual, that it's not like that company has a good culture or another company has a bad culture. It's more so that it's a good fit for the person who is in that culture, that it works well for them. And I'll explain that in more detail in a second. But over like a 20-year corporate career, I worked for a number of years in amazing organizations, very people focused, very human centered, really great, investing in their people, and just a really positive environment. And I didn't realize at the time just how lucky I was until I entered into 2 different organizations, 2 separate locations where it just was not the case. It was, in the first instance, very misogynistic, so very male-centered, male-focused. They had, like, the senior leaders were all men except for HR. That was the only woman. They were very kind of male-dominated in all management levels. They made a lot of promises to me that they didn't deliver on. So they told me I was going to be promoted to director level, and then they promoted my male colleague to be my boss, but did not communicate that to me. Which, again, if you're going to do something, you need to follow through and actually do that thing. So it was really frustrating to me. So I ended up leaving that organization and I traveled the world for about a year, which was amazing. Another thing I think is, if you have the opportunity to travel, especially when you're younger, definitely take that opportunity. The work will be there if you can afford to sustain yourself. If you can work as you go, amazing. But see the world, like, it's it's a big bad world out there and it's amazing. So I came back and I worked for another place for 4.5 years. Now, the first place I would describe as toxic, like there were no two ways about it. This second place was more, not sure if this is really a good fit for me. I didn't feel like I was really fulfilling my potential. I had so much more to give. Didn't feel like I had the opportunity to really give that. And so this became the fuel for me to ask a series of questions of myself, like how could I have ended up in this position? I've had a 20-year career. How can something like this happen? What should HR be doing? What should leaders be doing? And I went on and I did a master's and I asked those difficult questions during the master's and I came up with these theories and I wrote a dissertation about what it means to fit in at work, because that was kind of the answer. And that's since evolved in the work that I do and the conversations I have on my own podcast, really to focus on this idea of what it means to really thrive at work. And so coming back to the idea of culture and the idea of like fit versus like that's a good culture versus a bad culture. And this is where the importance of understanding yourself is. So if I could say on that first organization, it was pretty toxic. There was no clear, like, this is what we stand for as an organization. There was no clear values or anything like that. The second one of the values they had was simple. And it was just such a bureaucratic organization to get anything done. There was a lot of red tape. And to me, that is not simple. So again, you have to think about, if I want to get something done here, you hear from what I talk about, I'm very biased for action. And so if I'm trying to get something done and I'm hindered by having to fill out forms or a lot of red tape just to get something done, I find it very frustrating. And so that was not a positive experience for me. You can think about things like, and you don't have to get this right first time. You can try stuff and realize this is what I like and this is what I don't like. But think about things like how quickly things get done. So painting kind of broader brushstrokes here. If you think about a government department, a government agency, it's going to be a bit more bureaucratic, very rule driven. We have to follow this. We have to fill out these forms. And that might suit an individual really, really well. And then think about from like tech, that's going to be fast moving. It's going to be agile. Maybe you're trying stuff that's never been done before. So you have to be really autonomous and you're not just following a set of rules. You're kind of making stuff up as you go along. There's different kinds of cultures that exist out there. And what's right for you might be not right for someone else and vice versa. So it's kind of thinking more about understanding yourself to know, well, what do I like? Do I like that fast pace or do I prefer someone to spell things out for me and tell me exactly what needs to be done?
And you said something, it's not more about whether it's a good or bad company culture, but it's more about the right fit. Can we expand on that, whether a person's been dreaming and fantasizing about what work would be like in their dream job, and let's say they took the action to go there and they turn up in the first day and it's nothing like they would have expected it to be, and it doesn't meet their expectations, or it's very toxic or in ways that they would have never imagined. There are a lot of people that are taught also by peer pressure to stay in that area because it looks very good on paper or it looks very good on your resume, and they get stuck in that place, or they get the sense that they will never go out, or that they earn their spot there. How can they leave someplace else where they don't know what it's like, or maybe the bad thing happens all over again? What would you say to these people that are young, that just got into their dream job, that maybe haven't found their good fit place yet and feel stuck in that company?
Yeah, I mean, I've so much to say about that, and I can really empathize because that was me at times. I was like, hey, what's going on here? This is not like what I experienced before. It's not what I expected whatsoever based on the conversations that I had. And in order to enter a company, you're having conversations with people all the time. And you can think of that as they're making a promise as to what it's like to work in that organization. And then if you enter and it's like, hey, I'm solving a problem I did not even know existed because this did not come up in the conversation at all, and I think sometimes companies can do that it's you put your best foot forward for the interview. And candidates do that as well. So we're showing the best of ourselves, and then you enter and it's like, hey, this is not what I expected. And I think, you know, you can think of lots of different things. And this is kind of why I wrote the book. I wrote the book from a leader's perspective about creating the conditions. But watch this space. The second book might be more from the individual's perspective, like understanding ourselves, thinking about what is it that's happening here. Is it a clash, first of all, in terms of value? So are they saying one thing, but then they're behaving in a different way? And I think an easy way to think of this is if they talk about well-being at work, and it's really important to have balance, but then they're sending emails at 9 p.m., they're sending emails over the weekend, and they're almost expecting a reply, or at least the leaders are demonstrating those kinds of behaviors. And that becomes the norm, and that becomes expected of everyone, that they're working late nights and over the weekends and things like that. So you can think about it from the culture perspective and whether they're doing and behaving in a way that they talk about. So they say one thing, but they do another. That creates a sense of mistrust, because if they're saying this thing, then they're behaving in a different way. There's something that's not connected there, and it drives a sense of, like I said, mistrust. It can also be to do with needs at work. And so the strongest example of this, so from the research I did, we have 3 universal needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence, but we also have unique needs that need to be met. In the book, I call them drivers. And the example I want to share is about autonomy. So autonomy is this sense of choice and control over what you do and how you do it. And people know that it's really important. It's really important to have a high sense of autonomy and to get on and to do stuff. What a lot of people are not talking about is the balance and getting that balance right. So you can't just give someone a whole load of autonomy and expect them to figure everything out. You have to give them guidance or guidelines or rules to follow. And the difficulty here is that each person as an individual has a different level or a different need for autonomy or guidance, and getting that balance right at an individual level is really important and also really difficult. It could be autonomy is just one of our needs, but it could be that one of your needs is going unmet or is being frustrated in some way. So maybe you're not working to your strengths, for example. Maybe you're feeling like you're in over your head, or that you're actually kind of bored, that you could do the job with your eyes closed. Maybe you feel like you're being micromanaged by your boss, so you don't have enough autonomy. Or you could be left to kind of flounder and figure things out for yourself, which also doesn't work. So that's like the second area you can think about if it's not really fitting, if it's not really working for yourself. The third area then is around our capabilities. And this was, for me, the most interesting chapter to look at, because that's where I felt really, across all 3 probably, because I had a micromanaging boss and the culture definitely wasn't what I expected. But I also felt I had so much more to give. I had untapped potential. I'm like, I could do so much more. Why is this company not tapping into my brain and using that a little bit more? And so you can think about, well, what are your strengths? This is definitely not something that we talk about at work at all, or a lot. Maybe you have a vague idea of what people are good at, but I think we're so narrowly focused on the job and the role that we don't think about the broader scope or the broader context of what a person could be good at. And oftentimes, if someone is not performing in a role, we'll blame the person rather than how well we've supported them to be successful in that role, or whether it could be that the role is not a good fit, but it'd actually be a really good fit in another part of the organization. I've been there myself as the person who probably could have been performing better, but also as the manager who was like, this person is just useless. I think we're quick to just assume that it's the person and it's not any, we don't want to kind of accept blame ourselves. So they're the 3 areas I think that we can look at. So I suppose what I'm saying is it's not necessarily just culture. We can look across those 3 dimensions to figure out whether or not this is a good fit.
Yeah, I'm again, you put my mind at work and you keep bringing out ideas that I didn't think about earlier. For instance, I think there's a lot of us that don't have, especially when we're talking about young people, defined boundaries. And
Mm.
so it's very clear when you go into a new job and work environment and your schedule's from 9 to 6 and your manager or your boss comes at you at 5:58, "I need this presentation for tomorrow." That's a
Yes.
completely
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. It
Not
sounds
everyone has
familiar.
this.
Yeah.
But also, when you're in that competitive field, so if I'm very, very competitive and I need that in order for me to, I mean, to get challenged to work at my best efficiency and put in my best effort. But when it's not there, or when it gets introduced really recently or briskly and suddenly, I get a little on the edge and cautious about why that might be happening.
Mm.
And so I'm going to keep you for one more question here in the world of business and ask you how do you think teenagers that are getting that first job, young early career professionals, can differentiate whether it is a very competitive and challenging field, which makes them become into the best version and pours their magic out, or whether it's getting out of hand at sometimes and there might just be confusing that creative, let's say, stance and area with a little too much toxic environment.
Yeah. I want to say that I can absolutely relate to what you're saying about the last minute, like 2 minutes to six. By the way, can I get this for tomorrow? We had this phrase when I worked in one company. This is about, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And it was like, a lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. And so it was usually the case that someone else hadn't thought ahead or hadn't planned effectively, and then something would land on our desk that became urgent all of a sudden, when it wouldn't have been urgent if it had been shared a week ago. So I think if that becomes a pattern and it's impacting on you, then definitely something that needs to be addressed. One of the other things that struck me as you were speaking, that I didn't really talk about, and I do touch on in the book as well, is the idea that people respond to deadlines in different ways because we have different perceptions of time. And so I'm the kind of person, and I kind of touched on this earlier, where I love a short deadline. If you give me something meaty to do, and it
Mhm,
has to be turned
mhm.
around quickly, and you're like, this is the only thing you need to work on, but it has to be done tomorrow. I'm like, yes, I love that challenge. I love
Yeah,
it. Give it to me and I'll do it.
yeah,
If you give me a deadline that's 4 weeks away, you can bet that I'm waiting until one day before 4 weeks
yeah,
to get it done. And it's not helpful. Or if I get it done early, then I'm spending way more time on it than I need to because I'm perfecting it and all of that kind of thing. So I think leaders need to be aware, and we need to be aware ourselves of how we respond to those different kinds of deadlines. And is it a realistic deadline? Is it a pattern that's happening again and again, that I keep getting this urgent stuff and it's because someone else hasn't planned properly? And that's toxic. But then there is that kind of competitive nature, and competitive, I mean, as in getting work done quickly as opposed to competing with others for like a potential carrot. And, carrot as in like a promotion could be coming, but there's five of us who are competing for that, so it's, I suppose, finding that energy and finding really what energizes you to get the work done. And if it's draining you rather than energizing you over time, then that's something that you need to look at.
Let's talk about the thriving talent framework.
Yeah.
There's 5 steps to it, and we touched upon culture a little bit. Can you walk me through each one of them and why they play such an important part, and also why they actually can make you happier at work?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, I mean, we touched on three of them already, really, but I'll tell it from the perspective of the framework. So, during my master's research, like I said, I asked these hard questions, and what I came up with, and I'll use the kind of academic language that I was using then. It was about values congruence was the first one. The second one was about need satisfaction. And then the third one was about demands abilities. So our ability to meet the demands of the role. Now, I changed my language on that over the years, and things have sort of evolved from conversations I've had, from the work that I do with organizations as well. And so what that has become is now the Thriving Talent Framework. And as I was writing the book and the Happier at Work framework, but in the context of the Thriving Talent book. And I was really happy with the name of the book. I was like, why don't I change the name of this framework? It's now the Thriving Talent Framework. And so one of the additions to it, if you like, is the foundation of psychological safety. And what that means is feeling safe. So it's not about feeling comfortable. It's about feeling safe to speak up and challenge how things are done, present new ideas, challenge the boss, push back on deadlines, say no. If you feel safe to do that without fear of there being any sort of repercussions, like people are not going to laugh at you, they're not going to scream at you, they're not going to retaliate in some way. If you feel safe to do that, that's what psychological safety is. But most organizations, the default is that there is no psychological safety, that we don't have that. That we say yes when we really mean to say no, that we don't want to disagree with whatever the boss says. The boss speaks first and we just go along with whatever the boss says. And you may have created psychological safety with your peer group, but maybe you haven't created it in your team. Maybe you feel psychologically safe when you speak up, to your leaders, but other people don't feel psychologically safe speaking to you. So there's lots of different kind of factors that could be impacted. But I have that as the foundation because it needs to be there so that we can challenge culture, so that we can talk openly about needs and where our needs are not being satisfied, where our needs are not being met. So we can talk about strengths, so we can stretch, and that it's okay to fail in the situations where, we talked about failure already. If we have a psychologically safe environment and we're stretching ourselves and things don't go according to plan, we need to know that it's okay, that we've made a mistake, that we've messed something up somehow, that it's an opportunity to learn. I'll come back to the 3 pillars in a second. The second part that I added is leadership. So having leaders in the organization who are strong leaders and who can execute across the 3 pillars. And when I wrote the book, it was the last chapter that I wrote, and I was probably running out of steam, and I sent it to my editors and they came back and they said, we think you can do better on this. There's something missing here. And so I scrapped what I wrote. I was able to reshape some of it, but what it really focused on was ourselves. So how do we lead ourselves first? And so when I talk about leadership can mean anything. If you want to be someone who leads something and you can be leading yourself, then you can be a leader. And I think it's really important to lead ourselves first. So understanding ourselves through self-awareness, getting feedback, understanding the impact that we have on other people. And maybe coming back to what we talked about earlier, this idea of if you say something and then you don't follow through on it, what impact is that having on other people? The fact that you're not living up to your word. We can become more conscious leaders. There's a fantastic book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And I took some insights from that book as well. And it's about being a more conscious leader. So you can be above the line or you can be below the line. And one of the areas or one of the commitments that sticks in my mind is a below the line behavior would be gossiping about people, so spreading rumors, that kind of thing, saying bad things about other people. And then the above the line behavior equivalent of that is saying positive things about people and communicating clearly and saying what you mean and asking for what you want, all of those kinds of things. Another aspect of leadership is managing ourselves. So it's one thing to know and it's another thing to do. So if we know this about ourselves, how does that impact on how we show up and how we behave? Maybe we're making excuses that that's just how I am. I'm just really authentic and I say what I mean. But then thinking about, well, what's the impact that has on other people and how do I rein myself in rather than saying I'm authentic and I say what I think and I'm offending everyone around me? How do we kind of not just say whatever we think? How do we be a bit more tactful? So that's kind of the management part. And then the second part of that chapter is all about leading other people. So I drew upon insights from my own positive leaders, my 3 terrible bosses that I had, also insights shared in books as well. So the multiplier effect was a big one for me. I think it's really important to understand as a leader whether you are a multiplier or a diminisher. So that's kind of the kind of the top and tail. If you imagine it like a temple, so we've got a psychological safety as the foundation, and then leadership as the roof. In this model, and then the 3 pillars. And as I mentioned, I touched on those earlier. I've changed the language slightly. Where I talked about values previously, that's more broadly expanded as workplace culture. And within workplace culture, I address the fact that sometimes we unintentionally create a toxic culture, and how do we recover from that? What steps can we take to recover? The second one, which was previously needs or need satisfaction, now talks about drivers. And what are the drivers? What are the things that really motivate us to do our best work? And then included in that are some derailers. So there are things that really drive us and motivate us, but they're not helping us. They're more hindering us in our careers. And those are things like the one I always think of, because I have this as well, is the drive to always be right. Like, I want to be right all the time.
Yeah.
I want to have the last word. I want people to think that I know everything. And that can really derail us as leaders, as individuals, the need or the drive to be right all the time. And then I talk about capabilities rather than strengths. So it's kind of expanded, looking at individual strengths, looking at complementary strengths. How do we put people together who would effectively work together, even if they antagonize each other because they don't understand the other's perspective? And again, the example I always think of here is the big picture thinker versus the detail-oriented person. The big picture thinker might feel like the detail-oriented person is a bit of a stick in the mud and they need to bring everything back down to reality. And the detail-oriented person might think, they're not grounded in reality. They're a dreamer. This is never going to work. And so putting those together may antagonize each other, but it actually will, if they can work effectively together, it will be greater than the sum of the parts. Like, it's an amazing combination to be able to dream big, but then also turn that dream into a reality. Within that chapter, I also address the idea of how work is changing. So there's AI, there's automations that we can use. How do we leverage those things so that humans can do their best work? I talk about learning not as an event, but rather as something that we do in the process of the work that we're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. So it's not like, it's no longer I'm taking 2 days out or I'm taking a day out or an hour out. It suddenly becomes, how do I build learning into what I do on a day-to-day basis? How do I make sure that I'm learning all the time? Also, within the capabilities section, talking about what are the things that get in the way. So we've got emails, inboxes are full, people are not reading their emails, Slack messages, lack of collaboration, meetings that don't need to happen at all or that are not effectively run. Like, all of these things take our time and they take us away from really doing our best work. So they're the 3 pillars. And if you think about the entire model, so psychological safety, culture, drivers, capabilities, and leadership taken all together, it's from the perspective of a leader and creating the conditions to really thrive at work or create the conditions to help people to do their best work and to improve their performance. But leaders, if they're reading it, can also apply the learnings to themselves. And any individual who's reading it can also apply those learnings and go, okay, so how does this apply to me personally, rather than me as the creator of the conditions, but rather understanding what conditions I need to do my best work.
And then I guess there's also that idea about the balance in between helping them run short-term businesses demands that also overlap with long-term culture branding, because there's not just the idea of whether a company has a good or bad culture, it's whether they have it clearly defined or not.
Yes, yeah.
So many times I speak with keynote speakers that do interviews right before their speeches with a couple of employees, and they always ask them, what are your company's values? And so many times they're so unclear or not even at all defined. And it's about having a company that doesn't just pick the words out of a dictionary or out of the Google search of good teamwork capability,
Exactly.
but why it's actually meant to be that way. So
Yes, yeah. So oftentimes I think we do need to start with employees and understand, is this what you're witnessing on a day-to-day basis? Are these the behaviors that you're seeing? The classic example is Enron, and you're probably too young to even know about this story. I don't know if you know.
no, I don't.
Yeah, so like I think it was the early 2000s that this happened, and they would have had things like integrity in their list of values, and it was one of the biggest corporate scandals ever, like huge level of fraud, like really it collapsed. Basically, the company ended up going bankrupt. But it ended up with people, I think there were people going to prison. There would have been a huge amount of fines and things as well. But like that speaks to what they said their values were versus how they actually behaved. Yeah.
So what would you say makes this balance so difficult between the short-term business demands and the long-term culture branding?
Because the long term it's far away in the future. The short term, if I think back to my personal examples in the
Hmm.
companies I worked with, the short term meant that we had to, like, not me personally, but I would have been on calls with my business leader about the numbers, the revenue. And he in turn would have been on calls with his leader. And it went all the way up to the CFO of the organization who had to have a phone call with Wall Street and say, this is our numbers, this is our performance, this is what we're predicting for the next quarter. And he would have quarterly calls saying, this is how we are performing as a business. And so if you think about, like, it literally rolls up from the bottom, from the revenue that we were bringing in as a team, it rolls up to the numbers for Ireland and the UK, rose up for numbers for Europe, which rose up to global numbers. And so in one sense, it's like amazing because we see the importance of what we were doing. But in another sense, it's like it's always focused on the short term. And if you have a shortfall in one quarter, it's like, well, we can kind of take this from a future quarter and move it into this quarter just so we can say we met the numbers, but then we've left a gap that needs to be filled in the following quarter. So for me, I think that's why there is such that focus, because we are answerable to Wall Street. If it's a publicly traded company, they will be answerable in some way to meet some sort of quarterly deadlines. And that's why there's such a focus on that short term. I think if you look in the longer term, companies who invest in people, who are very focused on creating thriving workplaces, creating happier workplaces, they are much more likely to perform better in the longer term. But it's a really hard sell. It's a really hard argument to make when you can't see immediate results from it. So I think that's the kind of the tension that exists. There are companies who are doing things well. They're getting both things right at the same time. But I think it's hard if you are in that kind of revenue driven business.
Mhm. And to narrow it down back to people my age, if you're just an employee at a multinational company in this little office from this little town when you're representing over 8,000 employees worldwide, I think it's also very easy for miscommunication to happen, or for your personal contribution not to feel important or not to feel seen by all the
Hmm.
others. And so there's always that idea about how other big companies implement a nice workflow where actually people from different industries do end up meeting so as to get their own perspective or get new problem solving ideas from a person that maybe wouldn't have been in that sector or in that industry before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, can I take you to the world of ownership now?
Yeah.
Because I want to ask you, how can individuals take it, especially when we're talking about their own experience in an imperfect environment, or
Hmm.
or they're just starting out?
Yeah. So are you talking about like being the owner of your career? Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like there is this cliche where it's like, be the CEO of your own career, or you are the CEO of your own career. I think sometimes we let things happen to us, or we think that things happen to us and we have no control over them
Yeah.
whatsoever. So I think sometimes we can default into that. If I take us back to the 15 commitments of conscious leadership, one of them is this idea of ownership, responsibility versus victimhood. So if you are living in this, everything's happening to me, I have no control over anything, that's playing the victim. That is, I have no choice about this, I'm stuck here. Like, that's being in victim mode. What you need to do to get out of that is think about, and there are these, there's I think it might be Stephen Covey who came up with this, but there's a circle of control, the circle of influence, and then there's like one that's completely out of our control. And there are not that many things that we can control. Like, we can't control what other people think of us. We can't control what other people feel or say. But there are a lot of things, like what we say to ourselves, how we perceive things. Like, there are things that we can really control, or at the very least that we can influence. So I think rather than getting stuck and feeling a sense of, there's nothing I can do, this is just happening to me, it's taking responsibility and saying, and I love this word choice, because I think sometimes we feel like, I don't have a choice. I have to feed my family. I have to feed myself. I have to earn money. I have to. But if you change your language to saying, I choose to do this, I'm choosing to do this now. And that kind of gives you a sense of purpose as to why you're doing something. I think we nearly touched on this earlier, but I don't think we got to it. And I'm imagining, like, people who are very early career are not really thinking about family, but they might be thinking about things like rent. I need to pay my rent, or I'd really like to quit this job and go traveling for a year, or I really want to get these skills so that I can take my next job, or whatever that might be. So rather than saying I have to stay in this job, that, like, we kind of talked about that earlier, like, I'm in this job and I'm stuck and it's sucking the life out of me. It's not what I expected whatsoever. If you think, I choose to stay here for a year, for 2 years, so that I can have this company logo on my CV, or not the logo, but like the company name on my CV, on my resume, so that I can get exposure to the people I need to deal with, so that I can make connections, so that I can forge my way in this industry. Like, I'm choosing then to stay here, rather than I have to stay here to do this, this and this. It's like, I'm choosing to stay here so that I can live in a nicer apartment than I would be able to if I worked in this other company or in this other role. We're always doing something for a reason. And if we're not, then we are in victimhood, and we're like, the circumstances have impacted on me, and now I'm at the behest of whatever happens. It's like, no, step up and take responsibility. And maybe that's why I left those organizations, when so many people stay in those kind of toxic environments, feeling like they don't have a choice, or that's just the way it is, and work is supposed to be tough. And like, I don't buy that. I say, if I'm having a tough time and I don't want to stay somewhere, then I'm going to leave.
I mean, I feel like a lot of people then, to flip the script, are potentially even content, happy in their job.
Yeah.
But they've got that dream of always becoming a chef or traveling the world that they've never accomplished. And perhaps they're already down the 5-year, just in the same workplace. And it's not that they feel in a toxic environment, pushed too hard, challenged, or are too competitive, but maybe they want to go back to their own dream. What would your first advice be to that person?
That there's never a right time. That we're always waiting for the right time to do something, and there is never, ever a right time. If you want to do something, I'm getting shivers now saying that. If you want to do something, do it now. Do it now. We spend so much of our time, of our lives, waiting for the right moment to do something, to quit the job, to travel. When I was, to put this in perspective, when I traveled when I was 29, and that was considered very late. One of my friends said to me, "You've never seen a 29-year-old backpacker." And I can tell you that when I went traveling, there were backpackers in their 70s, in their 80s. There is never a right time to do something. Like, and without getting too philosophical or morbid, but life is short. So if you want to do something, if there's something that's really nagging at you, again, to bring it back to a personal example, I always wanted to live in London. I grew up in Dublin, and London was kind of, to me, the big smoke. That's like the big city where everyone goes to. And I assumed, this is the other thing, I assumed that everyone else had that same dream I did. And so I was waiting for someone to grab me by the hand and say, "Aoife, when are we going to London?" And it never happened. And I woke up one day and I said, this is never going to happen. I need to make this happen myself. And I feel like that was kind of the wake up call. And my life really began when I moved to London. That's kind of how I feel. So there's never a right time. And if you want to do something, make it happen yourself. Do it now.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's the best way I can introduce you to the SMARTA Podcast traditions. So, Aoife O'Brien, I've got 3 questions for you. The first one is where I ask my last guest to leave a question for the next one. And so, Alan O'Neill left over this question for you. How do we become happier at work?
I think we spent a lot of time talking about that. But for me, yeah, it's coming back to the framework. So thinking about, first of all, your values, understanding, well, what are my values and how are those values aligned with a potential organization that I want to work with. It may not be their real values. You won't know that until you speak to someone, until you enter that organization. The second one is our needs and making sure we understand what our needs are, where our needs being frustrated, and being able to articulate that and explain. You don't have to say needs. You can say, this is what's really frustrating me, or this is, how I'm feeling at work. And then the third one is strengths and making sure that we have the opportunity to use our strengths on a day-to-day basis. And when I talk about strengths, I mean the unique strengths that people have, not something that you're good at, that you're okay at, something that you are much better than everyone else around you at, that they come and ask you about. That is what you want to be spending the majority of your time, not all of your time, but the majority of your time doing that. And one thing that I didn't really talk about, but is the work environment in general. That can be things like whether there's hybrid, whether there's you're expected to be in the office, the kind of other colleagues that you have. So thinking about as you go through life, as you go through work, what are the things that are really working for me? And what hasn't worked, and being able to identify those things and articulate it as well.
My second question to you is around the world of books. So I know you've mentioned the 15 commitments of conscious leadership. What would you say are the 2 books, nonfiction or fiction, that completely changed your perspective in life?
I think that the first one that kind of got me into this, opened my mind to personal development, let's say, was The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. So that definitely goes up there. And another book that I read recently that I'm recommending to everyone, in addition to the 15 commitments of conscious leadership, which is fantastic, is another book called Your Best Meeting Ever. So it's about meetings, how to have effective meetings, whether we should be having meetings, like all of that kind of thing.
And my third question takes you back in time to when you were my age.
Yeah.
If you could talk to your 18-year-old self again, if there's one advice that you wish you could know at the very start of your career that can lead you through present moment, what would it be?
I think, yeah, it's for me, I suppose it's advocating for yourself. I think don't let other people's judgments affect you too badly. I studied well in school and then I did a bit more partying than when I got to university. I missed out on a few job opportunities because I think I was so focused. I just wasn't focused on what I was like, I'll go to university and that's kind of the end. I didn't really think about what was beyond university. So I think, yeah, learning to understand yourself and advocate for yourself, I think is important. Stand up for what you believe in. Sometimes we end up doing that and it really impacts you. So that toxic environment that I mentioned earlier, like it really impacted on my confidence for a long, long time. And I say a long time, like I'd say about 10 years, it really impacted me in small ways, like not consistently over 10 years, but certainly I was really feeling it for a long time. I blamed myself and yeah, just my confidence was really shot after that experience.
So, with almost a week before your book launches, Thriving Talent, I started the podcast with you talking directly with a person listening. So, how about we end it in the same way? Is there an end message as to why you should persuade them to read your book? Grab a copy before, the signed copies run out?
Yeah. I mean, so many reasons. Like, what? First of all, why
where do
not?
we begin?
Where do we begin? I suppose for me, if you like what I've talked about here, you've heard my thinking, you've heard my processes, you heard how I came up with the framework. The fact that it is written to leaders, but leaders can be someone who leads themselves equally. So it doesn't have to be that you're in a leadership by title position. It will help you to understand yourself. It might challenge how you think about work. And I think if you get access to this book, me being kind of late 40s, I'm writing it from the perspective of mid-career professional. If you get access to this kind of information early in your career, I think it could really support you to build those thriving environments that we all need to do our best work.
Aoife O'Brien, thank you so much for being on the SMARTA Podcast. I wish you the best of luck with the book.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate it. I love your thoughtful questions. So thank you, Sonia.
Thank you, Aoife. Right back at you. I'm so excited I talked with her because with every new podcast I have as a young early career professional going into university, going into my first jobs, working as a freelancer and entrepreneur, I'm finding out that everyone is human. So if you yourself feels a little intimidated or has those little doubts or moments of imposter syndrome, then thank you for choosing to listen to today's episode that really digs deep into really why this may happen, where it can stem from, and how to put an end to it, or how to understand why you're reacting that way. So, without further ado, if you like this podcast, if you learn anything new, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the show and rate this episode podcast 5 stars, as it is what keeps growing me, help and grow the show. And if nobody told you this before, I wanted to be the first to tell you that I truly believe in your ability to create the life of your dreams. I'm Sonia Marta. Thank you for choosing to grow smarter with me. And with that being said, I can't wait to see you here next Monday.